Howdy everyone, this is Volcanus, and today we're back in the world of single-player Tarkov. Just like my last video, going through the settings for Swag and Donuts, today we're going to be looking at SPT Realism. So we're going to look at the in-game settings, we're also going to look at the configuration file that is in the mod folder, and just like last time, I'm not just going to prescribe what settings I like, I'm going to try to teach you what the settings do so that way you can think for yourself and decide how you want to play it, especially with a mod like this because it's so configurable and there's so many different ways that you can use it. You can utilize as many or as few features as you wish. It's totally up to you. It's a very configurable mod, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Alright, so first things first, we're going to look at realism modconfig.exe. This is located in your main game folder under user, under mods, and then SPT Realism. It's going to be this bottom executable file. As it says here, this is the main configuration tool for SPT Realism. There is an in-game BepInEx mod menu, but this is where you can enable and disable a lot of the main features, each of which have their own tab here at the top that we're going to go over one by one. Because of the nature of this configuration tool, because a lot of it is just checkboxes and highlighting over them gives you some information, I'm not going to go super in-depth. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this tool simply because it is very straightforward of just, turning a feature on or off, and highlighting over it does give you plenty of information on what it does. However, I am still going to go through and talk about what each of these things does, talk about some of the features that are included in this mod, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this side because I do want to get to the in-game mod menu where there's actual variables that you can tweak and change. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but for now, let's dive in. First, realism and ballistics. Realistic player health and realistic ballistics, this is sort of the meat and potatoes of this mod. So looking first at realistic player health, this basically evens out the pool for players to have the same health as all other bots, including bosses. Everyone's got the same amount of health, and it is a higher amount, but while you do have more health, bullets also do more damage. So there's a little bit more wiggle room, I guess you could say, just because, the numbers for everything are higher, so it's just a little bit, things are just a little bit different. If for whatever reason you do want to disable the realistic player health, if you use another mod like the Dad Gamer or one of those types of mods, just uncheck that and then check revert to default. And likewise, if you don't have this checked, you probably should have realistic ballistics unchecked. I wouldn't recommend this, but if you do use another health mod, something like that, and you want to have some of the other changes that are included with this mod, you're totally free to do that. But this, I think, these features are kind of the main draw of why people use realism. So I would stick to leaving these both enabled. Buffing helmets, this just makes it so the way that armor currently works in this mod is instead of 1 through 6 like in base game, it's now 1 through 10, and this just raises the level for helmets by 1. Pretty straightforward. So it just makes them a little bit stronger. Yeah, onto the weapon changes. So recoil and attachment overhaul. So what this does, as you can see on the mod page, attachments now change a number of different variables. So no longer are you pretty much just playing for ergonomics versus recoil mitigation. Now you have to take into account dispersion, recoil angle, rate of fire, accuracy. Depending on what attachments you use and what type of ammo you're using, you have to take into account a lot of these variables now. So it's less going for, best in slot, the meta attachments. Now there's a lot more viable builds to play with. Yeah, it also just depends on your playstyle. So yeah, it's just a complete overhaul. Completely removes that meta aspect if you don't want to have to deal with all that to, get the best rifle or get the best M4 or whatever you're going for. It just makes it to where a lot more of the parts and attachments are all pretty comparable to each other. You just have to take into account all of these other new variables. Likewise for malfunction and overheating changes, you no longer have to inspect your weapon whenever it malfunctions. Also the barrier for malfunctioning has changed. I believe by default it's at about 93%, but we're going to take a look at that in the in-game menu. But now, whenever your gun malfunctions, you can just go ahead and clear it. I think in vanilla Tarkov, you have to inspect your weapon and then clear the malfunction. Now you just go ahead and clear it. Likewise, it takes a lot longer to overheat and to cool down. So I think I tested it. I dumped maybe 6 or 7 mags in a suppressed M4 before it started to kind of show those heat waves over the barrel. So it takes a lot longer. You're not just going to dump, 2 mags and suddenly have a glowing red hot barrel that's melting off your gun. It's not going to work like that anymore. Likewise for manual chambering, if you load into a raid, you have a loaded mag, but you don't have a round in the chamber, you're not just going to automatically load that round in the chamber. You have to manually do that. I believe Shift T is the Shift T, I think, is the hotkey to manually chamber around. It's just it's a nice little realistic feature that, it's one more thing. You got to always make sure that you load around into the chamber in your stash before you jump into a raid, because you can very easily get yourself killed. And then variable reload speed, like I was talking about with the attachments, reload speed is something now that is dependent on a lot more factors. So the magazine type, the ammunition type, the weight of the magazine, the weight of the ammo. It's very dependent on a number of different factors, and it can change depending on, your status. If one of your arms is blacked or damaged, then you'll reload slower. If you have a lot of adrenaline, you'll reload faster. So it depends on a lot of different systems now. If you want to have that, leave that checked. Mastery changes this. So the way that works is basically all weapons that are in the same family. So all of the AK type weapons, all of the AR platform weapons, all of the bullpups. Once you have mastery with one of them, you'll have mastery with all of them. Because realistically, if you use one AR based platform, you've used them all. You know how they work. No longer is it individual weapon based mastery. It's more platform based mastery. Headgear conflicts, this is kind of like a debug, I would say. As it says in here, it prevents items from looking cursed or clipping badly. It also prevents, a bot from putting an NVG mount, but then not having an NVG. Just little stuff like that. Deafening, that's a new mechanic where if you're shooting without ear protection, you will start to experience deafening. So you won't be able to hear as well in game. So ear protection is important. But if you don't want to play with that, if you play a lot of scavs that don't have ear protection and you think that's annoying, you can always turn that off. Comfort, this is another new mechanic. I believe this was planned for Tarkov, but it was not included. But how it works is every piece of gear has a comfort stat. So the more comfortable a rig, a backpack, armored rig, the more comfortable that they are, the lighter the weight of the items inside of them will feel to your PMC. So if you think about it in the way of if you have a really comfortable backpack, you can carry a whole lot of stuff in it and it'll feel lighter than it is. But if you have a really uncomfortable backpack and you load it full of stuff, it's going to feel a lot heavier than it is. So it works the same in game. Depending on the comfort level of your gear, you'll weigh more or less. Even with the same items, it just depends on the gear now, how comfortable it is. So some rigs are more comfortable than others. It just makes more items kind of viable. It's just another stat to have to take into consideration. So looking at the health and player tab, medical changes, this is something that some people really don't like, some people do. It's something that you're going to have to take into consideration and kind of play with for yourself. So the medical changes with realism, the way that it works now is if you're all bloodied and shot up, you can't just suddenly magically kind of patch yourself up and plug those holes and get back to 100% with meds. Now it's more, if you're bleeding out, you can sort of use meds as a stopgap and stop the bleeding, but you're still going to be slowly bleeding out and trickling health. And if you get shot, you're going to need to make it to an extract as soon as possible. You can't just rub some dirt on it and be good to go. Meds are just kind of a temporary way to keep yourself alive until you make it to extract. So some people don't like that. It is a lot more hardcore, and it does kind of make it to where if you get hit, you're sort of out of the game. But it's more up to personal taste. So if you want to leave those med changes in, I encourage you to try it both ways, see which one you like best. It does make it just a lot more hardcore and a lot less forgiving. So if you already think Tarkov is hardcore enough, then you can definitely uncheck that and check revert med changes, and that will go back to the way that it works in vanilla. And then stim and food changes. So stims, this just adds a lot more drawbacks and side effects. So a lot of them, it'll add, hand tremors or tunnel vision, stuff like that. It just makes it to where you can't just, pop stims willy-nilly. You have to think a lot more before you start using them. Same with food. This makes it to where you'll use the whole item. You can no longer just use them piecemeal, but when you use the full item, it no longer just instantly gives you, plus 40 hydration or whatever. It slowly ticks up over time. And then hazard zones are something new. They're a little iffy right now because it adds in areas of the game that are full of radiation or toxic waste, poisonous areas. So you'll have to avoid those or limit your exposure. And right now, there's no fix. If you get above a certain level of radiation right now, I believe there's no fix to actually get rid of that radiation. So I would be cautious if you enable hazard zones until the mod author does implement a permanent way to get rid of your radiation. I would be hesitant to use this. But to use it, you do have to have the med changes enabled, so just keep that in mind. All right, and then movement changes, fall damage, weight limit. So all of this, the way that this works, he reworked inertia, so you don't, inertia is not as strong. Likewise, you don't move as fast, so you're not dashing around sprinting as quickly, but inertia is not as strong. Likewise, you also regain your stamina a little bit quicker, so it's not as punishing when you're just starting out. You don't feel like you can sprint, 20 feet and then stop and catch your breath. You can go a little bit longer than that, but you're just not going to be as fast. So it's just kind of a rework to make it a little bit more realistic. Same with like fall damage and weight limits. It decreases the safe height from which you can fall and increases the damage. And if you weigh more, you take more damage when you fall. So if you are weighed down but with a heavy backpack full of stuff, you're gonna shatter those ankles. Yeah, stances are something you can further customize in-game, but it adds quite a few stances. It adds high and low ready, adds point shooting, it adds short stocking, rifle melee with a bayonet system, a mounting mechanic as well. Carrying your weapon in the default kind of idle pose now drains your arm stamina, because if you think about it, you're holding your gun up. So it's going to drain your arm stamina. It's going to make it harder to hold that up for an extended period of time. So you have to carry it in a low ready or a high ready. It also adds point shooting. So if you have a laser sight on the side, you can kind of hold your gun in a canted position and use your laser sight to aim. So that's pretty nice. There's also a mounted mechanic where if you're against a wall or up against cover, you can sort of mount your weapon to the cover or to the wall. And when you're aiming, you won't drain your arm stamina. So that's pretty nice. So, all right, so the bots tab. The bot changes. This is another pretty substantial group of changes that this mod works on. Bot changes. This is just pretty much this pretty much covers, the entirety of this tab. Just leave this checked if you want to have the bot changes that Realism does. Bot loot changes. So this makes it to where essentially the higher level a bot is, the better loot it's going to carry. Force boss items. This makes it to where like Sherman will always have his key, Vershala will always have his gold Tokarev, stuff like that. If you have a quest and you have to get a boss item for the quest, just clicking this ensures that the boss is always going to have it in their inventory. Increased bot cap, so if you don't have a mod like Swag and Donuts, then this will just increase the amount of bots that are in your map. If you do have a mod like Swag and Donuts, leave this unchecked. Likewise, open zones fix, spawn wave tweaks, and boss spawn tweaks. There used to be a compatibility note in Swag and Donuts about unchecking these. However, that's no longer the case. It says that Realism will configure this for you. I'm not sure if it, yeah, I don't know. I had the mod installed and these were checked, so I'm not sure what the default is or not. But personally, just to be careful, if you use Swag and Donuts, I would just leave these unchecked. It's not worth, creating a weird incompatibility or creating any kind of mod issues. I would just just leave them unchecked. Just don't mess with it if you have swag and donuts. But if you don't, open zones fix just adds more zones that bots can spawn in, so it's not just the default spawns. And then spawn wave and boss spawn tweaks. Spawn wave just makes PMC spawns a little bit more rare. Makes it to where you're not just as overwhelmed with scavs also. And then with boss spawn tweaks, this makes it dependent on the player's level. So at lower levels, you know, you're not going to get overwhelmed with having bosses in your raids. Totally up to you if you want to leave those unchecked though. But if you do use swag and donuts, I would recommend just not messing with anything that adjusts any kind of spawn rate. And then if you do use looting bots, I would check these for PMCs and scavs. It just makes it to where they carry more lootable items for looting bots, so that way the bots can, you know, pick stuff up off of other bots. Same with keys. This just adds quest keys, key cards, all of that good stuff into PMC inventories. For bot health, just like under Realism Ballistics, the player health, this just makes it to where bosses, raiders, boss followers, cultists, everyone has the same amount of health. It's a completely fair, even playing field, so I would personally leave these checked unless you want to have bosses and special bots that have more health. You can also adjust that here. So if you want to give bosses, you know, 3 times more health for whatever reason, you can totally do that. Just adjust this multiplier right here. Uncheck these, adjust the multipliers, go nuts, whatever you want to do. And then under bot tiers, so this is how you manage the bot progression. Under Realism, there are 5 tiers of PMCs that can spawn. First tier, you know, they're just gonna have little kind of dinky SMGs, maybe a shotgun, just hats and basic gear. Tier 2, they're gonna be, you know, might have some ear pro, might have some better guns, some basic AKs. Tier 3, they're gonna start wearing, you know, more Western helmets and armor, ear pro, you know, modified M4s, suppressors. Tier 4, they're gonna be looking a lot heavier. They're gonna have better armor, bigger backpacks, much better gear, really kitted out M4s, that kind of deal. And then Tier 5, that's gonna be your Giga Chads. You know, they're gonna have the face masks. They're gonna have, you know, level 10 armor. They're gonna have the best ammo, the best guns. They're gonna be decked out. And so each of those has a percentage to spawn. So levels 1 through 15, you're pretty much never gonna see Tier 5 or even Tier 4. But as you level up, as you get to like level 30, you're gonna see a pretty even split between like Tiers 3 and 4 of your PMCs. And then once you're above level 40, you're pretty much always gonna see Tiers 4 and 5. It's just meant to sort of emulate the live-like experience. As you're leveling up and getting better, the bots are on mostly the same track and mostly the same state that you're in. So it's pretty neat because it makes it to where, you know, you're not just going to immediately get crushed by Giga Chads, but when you're a high level, you're not just going to be running around facing, you know, dinky PMCs that aren't geared like you are. You're going to be consistently fighting similarly geared PMCs. So it's pretty cool. And if you want to adjust that, you just have to change these numbers, give them a value between 1 and 100, make sure that all of the numbers add up to 100. And then bot difficulty, for PMC and boss difficulty, I would leave these unchecked if you do use a mod like Sane that handles AI difficulty. But if you don't have a mod that handles your AI difficulty, then you can check these. Basically, it just makes it to where PMCs will have sort of different tiers of difficulty. It just tries to make it more of a live-like experience where you're going to get kind of that online, you know, every bot has a different level of difficulty. Same with the bosses. And PMC type changes, so this is dependent on the map and the time of day. So for example, Lighthouse, Woods, you're going to get more PMCs that have snipers. Night maps, you're going to get PMCs that all have NVGs and night scopes. It forces PMCs to change their loadouts realistically. So like, you load into factory, most people are going to have shotguns and SMGs and rifles. They're probably not going to come into factory with, you know, bolt action rifles. And likewise with Woods, you know, you're not going to roll up on someone with an MP5. They're probably going to have like an SV98. It makes it, the bots would play kind of how you would expect real life players to play. Bot names, this just adds more realistic names into the pool for bears and USEC. And then bot hostility chance. This is just the percentage of likelihood that a bot of your same faction is going to be hostile to you. So if you want to have it to where, you know, just starting out, if you're USEC, all other USECs are friendly to you, you can totally change this, make it 0, and, you know, none of them will be hostile to you until you level up more. Totally up to you, however you want to manage this. But by default, pretty much all of the time, every bot's going to be hostile to you. All right, and then the traders and flea tab. So looking first at the flea market section, this adds a tiered flea market setup. So there's 7 tiers that you unlock progressively as you level up. Yeah, so it unlocks the flea market at level 5, and then every 5 levels you unlock another tier. And there's 7 tiers. I'll let you do the math. And then alongside that, there's also the hardcore flea config, which makes it so instead of seeing, like, you know, multiple people are selling 10 of every item for varying prices, you're going to only see a couple if they're even selling any of that item, and it'll be pretty expensive, or durability will be low, so it makes it to where flea market's not super viable as an option to purchase weapons and armor from. So if you don't want to rely on flea market, then I would keep these checked. It's a much more hardcore experience, but that's up to you. Likewise, the trader tab, so by categories, this changes. So this is kind of already in the game where certain traders will only buy certain items. This just kind of expands on that. Repair changes. This makes it to where, so skier and proper, they will still repair and it'll reduce your max durability, but mechanics repairs won't reduce max durability, but it will just be more expensive. So it makes him kind of the late game, higher end go-to guy for repairs. So it's kind of nice to have that. Item loyalty levels, this will change. So since there's a lot of balance changes with weapons and ammo, this changes loyalty levels to kind of reflect that. If the damage and penetration has changed and reworked a lot of them, so this just kind of reflects that to make so this just kind of changes that to make it to where some of those will be available earlier than others. It just depends. But if you have the ballistic changes, I would recommend just leaving that in. Just because it's kind of all part of the bundled package of the mod author's sort of vision. But if you want to keep it like vanilla and know exactly when you're going to get every type of ammo, you can just go ahead and untick that, leave it like vanilla. Custom items, so this adds some, custom gear to, like, Ragman, and Mechanic and Skier will have some custom weapons, so it's just a nice little touch that some of the traders will have some unique items, so it can be interesting. Adjust prices, so this tweaks it to where helmets are cheaper, ammo, armor, and weapons are more expensive. Totally up to you if you want to have it balanced that way. And then this section, this is meant to make traders a little bit more dynamic. So randomizing traders, loyalty level, stock, and prices. So some items randomly could be available 1 loyalty level lower. Some stock might be, some items just might be out of stock once the store refreshes. And then some prices might be higher, some prices might be lower, depending on when the store refreshes. So if you want to have a very dynamic experience, you can leave these checked. If you want to keep the vanilla, base game traders the way that they are, just uncheck that. Keep all of those unchecked. Totally up to you. And then fence. If you think that fence, sort of like the flea market, is too much of a crutch to rely on, you can nerf him so that way there's not as much random loot that he sells. It's more expensive, lower durability, that kind of thing. Therapist, this just increases the cost of getting healed by therapist. Pretty straightforward. You either want that or you don't. And then buy prices, this changes it more on a sliding scale of, depending on what your loyalty level is with a trader, they will give you more money or less money depending on how much they trust you, essentially. So it kind of makes it a more dynamic experience. And then these modifiers, stock, max, and min modifiers, this just makes it to where you can set kind of an upper or lower limit on any non-stackable items. So weapons, food, some meds, that kind of thing. Anything that you can't stack in your inventory, this is just sort of an upper and lower cap for the traders. And then this is a multiplier for any of the stackable items. So if you want to have a crazy amount of ammo no matter what, you can set this to 2, 3, 5, 12 times. Or if you want to give yourself an even more hardcore experience, you could set that to like 0.5 or 0.2 or something just to make it just crazy. And then discounted increases for the random prices. If you have randomized prices checked, you can set, again, the upper and lower limits. So it's set at default, 0.85 is a 15% reduction. As you can see, 1 minus 0.85 is 15. And then same with 1.15 on this one is a 15% increase. So this is just if you want to make a wider range, or if you want to make a smaller range or even a wider range for the random prices for this option up here, that is completely up to you. And then lastly, trader refresh time. If you want to change this, by default, 1800 seconds is 30 minutes. So if you want to set it to like 600 seconds, 10 minutes, whatever you want to set it to, you can change that here. All right, and then MISC tab. So by default, all items are examined. You don't have to manually examine all of your items anymore. Unless you like doing that, then uncheck this. And then in-raid restrictions. So you can, like as it says, you can bring in as much cash, Bitcoin, LEDX, any of those kind of items that have restrictions on what you can put, like in your backpack, that kind of thing. This removes those restrictions. And then found in raid. So this removes the found in raid requirements. So anything that you put in your secure container, even after dying, is considered found in raid. And likewise, any quests that you have to turn in found in raid items, this removes those requirements as well. So these are just kind of quality of life changes. It just makes the annoying aspects of the game a little bit easier to deal with. And then devs tools, yeah, I wouldn't mess with this unless you really know what you're doing. If you do have questions about specific kind of stuff like this, if you really need to test, the bot and AI stuff, I would go into the SBT Discord and I would just ask questions there, because this is, because personally, I'm not even sure what some of this stuff does. I mean, except for like no fall damage. That one's pretty obvious, but yeah, then when you're done, when you're happy with all the changes that you made, click save and close out of it and you're good to go. All right, so in game, of course, hit F12 and I would check advanced settings just to make sure that everything pops up. Go down and click realism mod. Yeah, this first section, testing, I would just scroll right past this. This is a lot of kind of debugging tools. Don't mess with that. You don't want to accidentally break your mod. So yeah, looking at the rest of these, a lot of these are pretty straightforward. Yeah, just like the configuration tool that we just went through, a lot of these are pretty straightforward. Just checking a box to enable or disable and highlighting over it will give you some information. There are a lot of settings to go through, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about each one. But I do want to do my due diligence and make sure that all of these are understandable for you all. So yeah, a lot of these are going to come down to personal taste. It's going to be something that you're going to have to try with, try without, see for yourself. A lot of these are just personal taste. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, you can turn it off. So zero shift, sort of like in real life, if your optic over time kind of loses its zero, and your reticle will be over a point where your bullets are not hitting. This sort of tries to emulate that. It's pretty noticeable in automatic fire when it's on. Your reticle will sometimes kind of shift. It'll sometimes kind of it almost looks like it's bouncing around. So this is something that I don't love. Yeah, I don't love it. The accuracy in this game is iffy at best anyway, especially when you have to account for things like height over bore. So it's totally up to you. If you want to keep it, great. If not, I think it's totally fine to turn off. Weight mouse sensitivity penalty. So this will, if you're weighed down a lot, if you're really heavy, you will sort of move a little bit slower, your mouse sensitivity, which sort of tries to emulate, if you're kind of weighed down, you're not going to be moving your arms as quickly. So again, that's sort of a personal bit of flavor if you like it. And then NVGs and face shields, ADS. So these block if you have NVGs or your face shield down. Yeah, when you'll be able to aim down sights with certain optics, especially magnified optics. So your scopes, your LPVOs. But if you have like a red dot sight most of those you can still aim down. So if you want to keep that in, leave these checked. If you still want to be able to, you know, aim down your scope while you have NVGs on or while you have a face shield on, turn these off. Alright, ballistic settings. There is a knockdown and a disarm mechanic added with this mod, so the player and the bots can be knocked down and disarmed. The chance of those happening can be modified here with the advanced settings turned on for fall base and disarm base. And then if you want to be able to be knocked down and disarmed, by default, you are able to be disarmed and knocked down, so you'll be forced into prone or your weapon will drop. Bots are only able to be knocked down, so if you shoot them in the leg, sometimes they will just drop into prone. I think these are good ideas in theory, but sometimes they're a little bit, janky, and like knocking down a bot can almost be an advantage to them. Sometimes it feels like they just sort of dolphin dived and all of a sudden they're prone and they're shooting at you. Sometimes they won't shoot and they'll stand back up, and then they'll resume shooting. You know, it's Tarkov, it's going to be a little bit janky, so up to you if you want to include these. And then with disarming, it is Tarkov, so if a weapon is dropped, you know, there is always that chance that it could just suddenly fall through the floor and just disappear into the void. So you have to take that into account if you want to have that risk of potentially the abyss swallowing up your beautiful weapon that you get shot out of your hands. Totally up to you. I would say I like playing with the player disarm and knockdown turned off just because of jank. But you know, totally up to you. Global damage modifier, that's pretty straightforward. I would just leave this at 1. Turn it up, more damage is done. Turn it down, less damage. Pretty straightforward. Same with the ragdoll force. So yeah, if you don't want your if you don't want ragdolls to, if you don't want that Tarkov jank, that sort of Tarkov Bethesda jank that can sometimes send bodies flying, leave this checked, and I would just leave this at 1. If you want to mess around and do some wacky stuff, you might be able to just crank this up and see what happens. But again, for a sort of grounded, realistic experience, just leave these the way that they are. Hit sounds are new. Yeah, so you'll be able to kind of hear that faint sort of thump as you hit something. So if you want to make those louder, turn these dials up for flesh, close armor, distant armor. If you don't want to hear them, or if you want them to be quieter, adjust these accordingly, or just turn this off in general. And then hit zones, so this is new, so it lists most of them here, so like upper arm, forearm, thighs, calf, neck. There's a lot of new zones added, so you can get like throat shot, armpit shot. There's zones around the armor plates and around your vests that can be hit, and the further away from fatal areas they are, the less damage they do. So it sort of accounts for a multiplier. So if you get shot in like the forearm, it's not going to do as much damage to your arm as if you get shot in the shoulder. Same with the chest, you know, if you're shot in the throat, that's pretty much going to instantly, you know, kill your head. But if you get shot in like, yeah, sometimes you can survive like getting shot in the armpit or in like the lower back. It just depends. So it's a nice little bit of you know, it can save you from, you know, getting your limbs blacked if you get shot, you know, in the foot or in the hand or the forearm or calf or wherever. All right, recoil settings. This is another one that's largely going to be personal taste. So I personally turn camera recoil way down because I fucking hate camera recoil. I don't know about you guys, but I hate camera recoil so much. I think it is the worst part of Tarkov, and that's saying something. So yeah, if you want to turn down the intensity of recoil in general, you can adjust this accordingly. I will say, I don't know if it's you know, placebo or what, but I feel like recoil in general does feel better in this mod. I'll throw up an example on screen, but yeah, the sort of vanilla where you fire up and then your PMC takes over the recoil control and drops it down, and then the barrel keeps rising after that. That's not in this anymore. Now it's sort of the traditional FPS experience where the barrel just climbs on its own and there's no forced input from your character that you have to fight against and then fight against the recoil. None of that's here anymore. I'll show you some recoil patterns on screen while I'm talking about this, but yeah, if you want to adjust any of the individual aspects of recoil, that's going to be here under recoil settings. So you can adjust down to the vertical recoil, which is your recoil climb, horizontal recoil, which is sort of that forward and back motion of the weapon, dispersion. So yeah, it's pretty much just the pattern spread of where your bolts are going. Camera recoil, we all know what camera recoil is. It's that the way that your head sort of flops around as you're shooting. Recoil angle, so this is new with realism, where you're going to have to take into account the balance of your weapon and the weight of your weapon and the balance of it, where if it's too front heavy or too back heavy, there's going to be more or less of a recoil angle. It's gonna be different for every weapon, and it's different for every setup on every weapon. So this is something that you're gonna have to play with to see if you like it or if you don't. But it's attempting to sort of be more like real life, where if you have a very front heavy weapon, it's not going to raise as much while you're shooting. So if you've got, you know, a longer barrel with a suppressor, there's going to be less of a recoil angle because there's more weight out at the front of the gun, the way that the gun is balanced. Think of like a lever on a fulcrum. So less muzzle climb, essentially. And if you want to change the recoil angle multiplier, that's this slider right here. And then convergence, that's that auto compensation that I was talking about, where your PMC will pull down. If you do want that back, just crank this slider up, and the higher the number, the more of that auto compensation you'll have. All right, now advanced recoil settings. This mod also does attempt to not have like a consistent identifiable recoil pattern every single time, because realistically, you know, recoil is going to be, you're not going to shoot in the exact same pattern every single time, you know, every time you fire off a burst. So this is an attempt to have that sort of random, more realistic feel for your recoil patterns. So the higher that you set this, more deviation from point of aim after firing. So basically that just means the higher that number, if you have your barrel pointed at something, the higher this number, the further your barrel is going to be from that original point after you stopped firing. So yeah, these two are just sort of an attempt to, just like they say, they're an attempt to kind of keep that randomness to your recoil. So it's not as predictable. Camera recoil speed, the speed at which the camera will kind of move around whenever you're firing. Yeah, so camera recoil speed and wiggle, so that's just going to be adjusting the movement during camera recoil while your head, quote unquote, the camera is moving around. You can adjust these, dial them as you like. The lower these settings, the less movement there will be, the less speed there will be. And then additional visual recoil and visual recoil multiplier. So this just adds more movement to the weapon. So while you're shooting, especially when it's fully automatic, this is just going to make the weapon sort of look like it's bouncing around a little bit more and moving a little bit more while you're holding it. So it's not just holding it perfectly still. So it's more of an animation add, but it does affect your accuracy because the weapon is still moving. So that it's more of a personal taste. If you want to keep it, it's just another flavor add. All right, so hybrid recoil system. This is closer to vanilla, where if you do try and control the recoil, it will add the auto compensation in. And so your PMC will pull the weapon down and attempt to control the recoil while you're controlling the recoil. But if you don't try to control the recoil, your PMC won't auto compensate. I don't know, it's a little weird. You can try it if you want to. If you really like the vanilla recoil system, you can try and add this in and add in the auto compensation and try to adjust that to your liking. But I don't know. Personally, I would say unless you love the vanilla system, just leave these disabled. Yeah, so player control strength, this has to do with the hybrid recoil system. So if you do have these enabled, you can adjust your PMC's sort of strength of compensating for the recoil right here. All right, so vertical and horizontal resets. So the reset is after you're done firing, there's a certain amount of time that passes where the gun will reset to where it was before you started firing. Essentially, so if you're firing in bursts without much break in between, you're going to still experience more recoil. Your gun is going to continue to move, while you're firing in those bursts, it will reset to a point, but it won't fully reset to that pre-fire position until you reach a certain point. So if you want your weapon to reset to those points vertically and horizontally, check these both, and then you can adjust that reset with these dials. So yeah, so this is low by default because you're not just going to automatically pull that weapon back into its exact pre-fire position right away as soon as you're done shooting. But if you want to have a faster reset, just crank these dials up. And for the sensitivity, moving your mouse after firing will also sort of cancel that reset because you're moving around, so you're not going to be in that pre-fire position. Yeah, so turn these up if you need more movement to trigger that cancellation of your reset. Keep these low if you want only a little bit of motion to cancel that reset. Yeah, so recoil smoothness, as it says, this is how fast your recoil will move your weapon. So the higher your recoil smoothness, the quicker your weapon will move. So if you have this low, like it is by default, yeah, so your weapon will have that kind of smooth, gradual rise, but if you really crank that up, it'll very quickly, the recoil will very quickly move that weapon all around. Your recoil climb multiplier, so this is how quickly your vertical recoil will. So if you want to have a lot more vertical recoil, a lot more muzzle climb, turn this up, and then of course for vice versa, turn that down. This is the exact same thing, but specifically for pistols. And then there is a ceiling for how high your recoil can climb. As you saw in that clip before, it just sort of caps. So you can raise this to sort of make it to where the weapon will continuously go up and up and up and up. And then your S pattern, of course, this is what we talked about with dispersion earlier. So that kind of curve that your weapon recoil gets, this will just make that more or less exaggerated. And this is the speed at which it will make that S pattern. Yeah, so the reset that we were talking about earlier with your recoil reset, this is how you can measure that. So it's in seconds, so 14 milliseconds is the length of time for that weapon reset. So basically almost instantaneous. If you want that to be higher, a little bit more noticeable, you can change that here. Just raise that in seconds. Of course, it does cap out at 0.5 seconds, so half a second for that reset, but totally up to you where you want to adjust that to. Rearward recoil, keep that if you want your recoil to push towards your shoulder, move back whenever you're firing, instead of moving forward. And then for your horizontal and your vertical recoil, the wiggle, the amount of movement that the gun has, this is where you can adjust that, make that more or less prevalent. All right, on to stat displays. So for all of your ammo by default, it will show damage, penetration. It'll show all these extra stats. Likewise, with your weapons, it will add this balance stat to kind of show where the balance of weight is on the weapon. So if it's, more front heavy or more back heavy. So if you want to be able to see all of these stats, just check them or disable them. But as it warns here, if you do enable too many of these, the UI does get a little bit ugly to read. There's only a certain amount of space that's visible for these stats before you pretty much won't be able to read the information below. All right, onto weapon settings. So for increased inaccuracy, yes, this makes it to where the MOA is a much more important stat to pay attention to. Yeah, so I'll show you a comparison firing with increased inaccuracy enabled. Alright, and then I'll show you what it looks like with increased inaccuracy disabled. Yeah, so as you can see, with increased inaccuracy turned off, there's a little bit less deviation in spread along the x-axis, as you can see. So I don't. This would definitely require a lot more testing, I think. But just sort of this off the cuff, very quick, you know, just firing a couple mags. The very common use case of mag dumping from, you know, 15 feet away. Increased inaccuracy just gives you a little bit more spread. It gives you a little bit more of that S pattern, whereas with increased inaccuracy turned off, it was a little bit more of a cleaner, straight vertical raise. Definitely requires further testing, but that's just my humble opinion. So leave that on. By default, it's on. Leave that on if you want to keep that sort of more erratic spread. Totally up to you, though. And then malfunction durability threshold. Alright, so malfunction durability threshold. So this is the barrier at which your weapons will start to malfunction. So by default, it's at 98%, which is, I think, a little high. If just from mag dumping that default M4, like 4 or 5 mags gets it down to 98%. So if you want to have it kind of, yeah, to the point where it's like, oh, you have to quote unquote repair your weapon after every single raid, as in like you need to keep it clean and maintained or else it'll start to gunk up and jam. If you want to play it, like kind of role play it like that, that's fine. But I think you can definitely get away with lowering that a little bit more, even down to like 90%, just to sort of simulate like, okay, after a couple raids without any sort of maintenance, then it'll start to jam and malfunction on you. But it's more, yeah, I think it's more up to personal taste. So whatever threshold that is, that's when you'll start to experience more malfunctions once your weapon's durability percentage drops below that point. Procedural intensity, so as it says here, the sway, weapon movement, weapon inertia, animations, this just changes the intensity of that. So if you want to make those more or less noticeable, dial this up higher or lower respectively. Same with aim sway, so if you want your weapon to be sort of swaying slowly to mimic movement while you're breathing, you can change this, make this more or less intense, whatever you wish. All right, health and meds settings. So for enabling hydration energy loss rate changes. So this will change the rate at which you lose hydration and energy depending on your status. So certain stimulants, if you're sprinting, if you're more injured, you're going to be losing more energy, more hydration, you know, especially if you're injured, you know, if you're gut shot, I think you lose hydration at like a crazy higher rate. Yeah, so if you want to have that variable loss rate, enable this and it will change the rate at which you lose those depending on your status. But then these are your default rate drain multipliers. So the lower you set these, the slower your hydration and your energy will drain. Tourniquet effect. So this is sort of what I was talking about back with the med changes in the other configuration tool. So if you have this tourniquet effect enabled, that means whenever you have a tourniquet on, your HP of that limb will still slowly tick down. But if this is disabled, it'll behave just like vanilla. Once it has a tourniquet on there, it won't tick down. Gear blocking consumption. So if you have a mask on, NVGs, face shield, anything like that, you won't be able to eat or drink naturally. I think having this enabled just makes it more realistic. Same with gear healing. So this is, I don't know, this one's up to personal taste because, yeah, if you have a chest or stomach wound and you have a vest on or rig or anything or backpack, sometimes that gear can block it, so you won't be able to heal yourself until you physically drop your gear on the ground and then heal yourself, and then you can pick it back up and equip it, which, again, with Tarkov jank, there's always that risk that it could just fall through the map. So this is totally player choice right here. The adrenaline system, this one's pretty interesting. So you will start to get tunnel vision. Yeah, so sort of just like with painkillers. If you're getting shot at, or if you get shot, you'll experience adrenaline. So yeah, just like if you have an adrenaline rush, you might sprint faster, you might reload faster, but you will get that sort of tunnel vision effect. You might get tremors, your hands might start shaking. It's just to sort of simulate that real world, like you're in the middle of a gunfight, you're getting shot at, you're gonna be freaking the fuck out kind of effect. And then if you do have your gear block enabled, whatever you set your hotkey to, you just double press that. So by default it's P, double press P, and you will take any of your gear off that's blocking your healing. Hazard zone settings, so your device volume, so these are your Geiger counters and gas analyzers. So if you are in a hazardous zone, if you do have these enabled and you have one of those devices, this is just pretty straightforward volume at which those will beep. All right, so your speed modifiers, so sort of as mentioned in the other configuration tool, your movement speed is affected by what you're walking over, so you'll walk faster, over concrete than if you're walking through bushes. So if you want to keep that in, just leave this enabled. If you want to get rid of that and walk at the same speed over all terrain, then disable that. If you want to add in sloped movement, so if you're going down a slope, you'll be moving faster. Going up a slope, you'll be moving slower. There is one caveat that map geometry is not great, so there's random slopes in there. You might randomly speed up or slow down, so word of caution, play around with it if you feel like it. As mentioned in that previous configuration tool, so the deafening mechanic, if you have ear protection or a headset on, personally for this whole section, I would just leave it on default. It's already tuned pretty well. Although I imagine there are going to be certain edge cases where you might want something to be quieter or softer, but just do be careful because turning the gains up on some of these can blow out your speakers or even worse, blow out your eardrums. You don't want to mess with that, so I would personally leave all of these tuned the way that they are, but if you want to dive in, I'll tell you what these do. So yeah, the headset bass volume reduction multiplier, turning this up will just increase the volume reduction that your headsets give you. This is your sensitivity for the cutoff, so if a noise is loud enough, it will reduce the volume of it. So that's sort of the way that headsets like Comtacs work in real life, is you can hear everything around you, but if there's a noise that exceeds a certain decibel threshold, it will kind of mute it a little bit more. Yeah, so turn these down if you want to make them more sensitive. Likewise, this is just the speed at which it will start reducing volume, so it's already it's already at its lowest spot. So if you want it to, for some reason, reduce volume slower, just raise this up. Yeah, so this is just all your ambient noise in your raids. If you want those noises to be louder, turn this up. If you want them to be quieter, turn those down. Shared movement, so this is player and NPC. So yeah, this is specifically for sprint. So if you want sprinting to be quieter or louder, turn this down or up respectively. Same with NPC and player movement. This is just normal walking around, your gear kind of rattling. Yeah, so if for whatever reason you think footsteps are way too loud, you can turn these down, or if you want to hear them better, turn them up. So this is just the volume of whenever you ADS, whenever you have that kind of rattle. Gunshot volume. So this is when you're not using headsets. This is going to be the volume of how loud or quiet gunshots are. Turn them up if you want it to be a little bit louder, or you can turn it down to make them even quieter. Headset gain. So this is one that you probably shouldn't mess with. It's essentially just your volume control for whenever you're wearing a headset. So if you want things to be louder, turn it up. I would definitely leave it where it is. You don't want to damage your hearing, but if you want it to be even quieter, you can turn it down. And then just like with recoil, there is a reset for the deafening mechanic. So yeah, if you do start to experience deafening in game, then this is just how long it'll take for that deafening to reset. All right, then the gain cutoff multiplier. So this gain, the volume increase that you get from wearing headset, this is just the cutoff. If you're firing your weapon, you'll get a 25% reduction in gain, so it's not as loud. But if for whatever reason you want that to be louder or be quieter, you can turn that up or down respectively. There you can add a keybind to increase or reduce gain. I would personally clear these just because, like for example, for the FOV fix, it does use plus and minus, so you don't want to mess with accidentally increasing your gain and blowing out your eardrums. Just go ahead and clear these so you're not accidentally hitting them in a raid. Just don't risk it. All right, and then with that deafening mechanic, this is how quickly you'll get deafened whenever you're hearing loud noises around you. Higher equals faster, and then with the reset rate, again, the higher this is, the quicker you will regain your hearing after a loud noise. Same with tunnel vision and tunnel vision reset rate. The higher these are, the faster you'll get your tunnel vision, and then the faster it will reset. Alright, on to weapon speed modifiers. This is going to adjust the speed of the animations of all of the reload, aiming down sights. So if you really want to make any of your reload or ADS speed, animations quicker, this is where you'll do that. Aiming down your sights for your pistol, just general aiming down sights, general magazine reload speed, general malfunction, fix clearing a malfunctioning round, reload speed for underbarrel grenade launchers, rechamber speed for your pistols, rechamber speed in general, speed of racking your bolts, shotgun racking, checking your chamber for shotguns, checking your chambers for pistol, checking ammo in pistols, general, just ammo check, general quick reload, and then internal magazine reload. So making any of these higher will make it obviously faster, making it lower will make it slower. All right, on to weapon stances. So if you want to stay in a stance, so say you have your weapon in low ready, and then you drink a bottle of water. Whenever you are finished, you'll go back into that low ready stance if you have this enabled. But if you want to go back just into a default stance after using an item for whatever reason, disable this. Block shooting. So if you fire while you're in low or high ready, your barrel obviously is going to be pointed, down or up. So if you enable this, instead of shooting in low or high ready or whatever stance you're in, it will cancel that stance and then you'll fire. So there is going to be a little bit of a delay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Sprint aim penalties. If you're sprinting around, ADS is going to be a little bit slower coming out of that sprint, and you will have worse accuracy coming out of that sprint. So if you have this enabled, you're going to have to be careful about when and where you're sprinting. But if you want to leave that off and not have it affect your aim, totally up to you. High ready. So this is that tactical sprint where if you have your gun in high ready, you'll kind of one-handed carry your weapon raised up in the air while you're sprinting. If you want to have that, leave that enabled. You do have to do it from a high ready position though. Alternative pistol position. So this kind of defaults your pistol down in sort of a low ready stance, and it animates the aim down sights. So that way, instead of just popping up and appearing in an aim down sights position, now you'll actually see it fully animated go from that low ready all the way up aiming down sights. But if you want to have that default, just disable that. And then as I touched on before, if you don't have your weapon in a stance, so if you're not in low ready, high ready, whatever position, if you're just in the idle default holding your weapon up, it will drain your arm stamina. So if you want to get rid of that, if you want to not have to worry about your arm stamina, no matter what stance you're in, just disable this. Active aim, so that's when you're going to have your rifle that's when you're going to have your weapon canted at a 45. So if you want to be able to reload while you're in that, the reload animations might be a little bit janky because your weapon's going to be angled weird. So it's disabled by default, but if you want to be able to do that and not have to leave that stance, then you can enable that there. All right, so this changes quite a bit. So if you have your weapon in a high or low ready, you will regenerate your stamina faster. You'll regenerate your arm stamina faster if you have your weapon in a low or high ready, or if you're short stocking it. Likewise, if you do have your weapon in high ready and you're sprinting, you'll go faster doing that tactical sprint one-handed carry from the high ready. Yes, if you want to have any of those changes, then leave that enabled. Mounting UI, there's a little indicator that will pop up when you're able to mount your weapon, and it'll have a sort of a bracket to show you which direction the mountable surface is. So if you want to have that, it'll pop up in your lower right-hand corner, and it'll let you know when to mount. If you want to have that, leave that up. If you don't want to have to see that, just disable it. And then the X, Y, and Z axis position, if you want to change the position of the weapon, I wouldn't mess with this. I would just leave this at default because it might end up kind of janky. But if you really want to adjust, it's on an X, Y, and Z axis, so the 3D plane, adjust these accordingly if you want to change the starting position. Totally up to you. I would personally just leave these default. And then if you want to change the, if you want to change the speed between your stances, then you can adjust these if you're rotating through them. So we'll get to this in a moment, but if you hold down Control and roll the mouse wheel, you can rotate through your stances. So if you want to adjust the speed at which you do that, crank this up. And then if you want to adjust just the general hitting hotkeys or keybinds, transitioning between stances, increasing the speed, dial this up. All right, now weapon stances keybind. So this is where you can change the hotkeys for your weapon stances. by default, if you hold left control and scroll the mouse wheel, if you hold left control and scroll up, it'll go into a high ready, scroll down, it'll go into a low ready, and you can just sort of scroll through them. Hitting K sets you into a patrol stance, so you'll have your weapon completely lowered. Yeah, and as it says, it's just for LARPing. It doesn't really do much for you except for just a faster arm stamina regeneration. Melee keybind, this is if you want to do a muzzle strike, or if you have a bayonet equipped, you can strike with your weapon. It's pretty useful for clearing out like a window, honestly. It has its use cases, so you can go ahead and set that to whatever you like. You can set that to a mouse button if it makes it easier. Mounting, this is just whenever that icon pops up in the bottom right hand corner to let you know that you can mount, you will be able to mount your weapon. If you want to lean against a wall or against cover, you'll enter that mounting mechanic, and your arm stamina won't drain, and you'll have increased stability. It is a toggle though, so you'll have to toggle in and out of it. And then these are just your keybinds for short stocking, so when you tuck the stock under your arm, a low ready, holding it lower, high ready, holding your weapon higher, active aiming, where you're holding it in that canted hip fire. This is pretty nice for when you have a laser sight on there. This is going to be all personal taste. If you really want to use any of these or don't use any of these, just set them to whatever hotkey you feel comfortable with. And then the rest of these, this is all going to be adjusting positioning and animation for the various stances. So they're all pretty much the same. I would leave these default unless you really want to adjust positioning or rotation, or if you really want to adjust the speed of which you enter or exit the animation. I personally think these are all tuned just fine, but if you really want to, you can dive in and adjust rotation and positioning. I wouldn't really mess with it just because you don't want to break any animations, but it's up to you. But yeah, that's the rest of these. Yeah, that's the rest of the settings is all adjusting those stances and then third person. That pretty much covers it for in-game realism mod settings. This was a lot. It didn't really sink in how many mod settings there were until I actually really got into the thick of it. But hopefully I was able to clear up any sort of confusing or unclear settings. I really hope that you all were able to learn something from this. If you didn't know how customizable realism was before this, hopefully you realize that now, and maybe it'll convince you to pull the trigger on downloading this mod. It's a great mod. I highly recommend it. Absolutely recommend playing with it, and recommend experimenting with it, turning some of these settings on or off, cranking them up or down, seeing what you like. Again, a lot of this comes down to personal taste. I can't really recommend that for you, but it really comes down to what you like, what you want. So I hope I was able to give you some kind of ideas of what you'll want out of this mod. If you have any questions, post them down in the comments below. If there's anything that I didn't go over well enough and you're still unclear about, go ahead and ask. I will do my best to clear that up for you. But I hope you all enjoyed. I am very quickly going to be getting to some proper SPT content. Yeah, I'm going to be setting up a 0 to hero run here pretty soon, so stay tuned, subscribe, and watch out for that. Yeah, if there's any other mods that you want to see me run through the settings with, comment them down below. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.